声渐起航，清风化夜空，英雄泪不轻淌，碧血照丹青。
Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Joel Clark, and we're here to talk about Heroes Shed No Tears for another episode of Wuxia Workshop. This is a film by Chor Yuen, but it's based on a Gu Long story, and it was released in 1980. And what you just heard was the introductory music to the film, which I included in this broadcast. We don't normally do this, but I included it because that music is very important to the film and very important to the themes of the movie, and it just kind of it just kind of cuts to the chase and gets to the heart of the story. So Joel, this was your first time watching this film, and I apologize for my cough just now, but I want to keep plowing ahead so we don't have to redo the intro scene. What was your take on this film? Like, how did you react to it the first time you saw it?
Oh man. Okay, so I've only seen it one time too, and to give you an idea, I'm definitely going to see it again. By the way, it is flu season. I think we're both sick, so there will be some amount of coughing.
Well, actually, I'm not sick. You're sick. I just made the bad decision of eating a Nutri-Grain bar before sitting down to do this, and a stray piece of seed skin got into my throat. So I'm fine now.
Sucks. Okay, well, moving on. My take on it, it's okay. I think I started a lot of these in a very positive note where I'm like, it's really good.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sell this movie short. It's not that it's very good. It's extraordinarily good, and it's rich. It's not dull. It's got this really great pacing where you really are only get to see the most impactful scenes, but it doesn't lose any cohesion for that. There's strong characterization from all the characters. There's a really immersive and interesting plot. There's a lot of really intense fight scenes, and there's a lot of variety in the fight scenes. There's these beautiful, like, the visual elements of this movie are really gorgeous. The way they set up scenes, the places and sets they use, the costuming is all really eye-catching, and it consistently finds new ways to draw your interest and attention. And it's got such a fantastic depth to it. This is one of the movies that I would. It's in my little winner's circle of, like, quadruple gold star super media, along with stuff like Mervyn Peake's Gormenghast and the writings of Thomas Ligotti, and like stuff like that, where it's not just about like reading or watching or whatever at one time. This is a movie that rewards your investment, and that's kind of my initial impression, and my ongoing impression as I was watching it was, I need to watch this again because I want to analyze it deeper. I want to know more. Yeah. I want to watch this with the knowledge I have now again. This movie is like The Godfather in that it's something that you immediately want to watch again as soon as you're done watching it. Not just because it's entertaining, but because it's just so deep and full, and it's got a great density to it that really makes it satisfying to watch, and I'm certain satisfying to rewatch.
No, and I think you hit on all the crucial things too. The emotional weight of the movie, the visual appeal of it. It's a Chor Yuen film, and he's very good with the visuals, and this is one that you can really see that. And again, it has like, just this depth to it, and it's also the kind of movie, like, everybody I've shown it to has liked it. My mom even liked it. Do you know what I mean? Like I saw it with my mom one night, and she looked at me and she was like, "Oh, that was a really good movie." And that's not her typical reaction to these kind of films. Usually if I watch a film like this with a family member, they're humoring me. And
yeah, I have that feeling.
And so I just think it kind of hits you in the gut when you see it. When I first saw it, and again, we've covered it here on the podcast like 3 times, and I've covered it on my YouTube channel like twice. So this is, and I've covered it on the blog too. So this is a film that gets a lot of coverage from me here. And so here we're going to talk about it in a slightly different way than we normally have. But I do want to give my recap of the plot, which is just, this is just a little snippet I wrote down. And I probably used the same snippet the last time I talked about it. But basically, it's based on a book by Gulong, and the story is following his master's instructions. Little Gao, played by Alexander Fu Sheng, descends down the mountain at a crucial time with a tear-stained sword and finds himself in the middle of a great rivalry between two powerful heroes. Now, there's a lot more to the story than that. This is sort of the setup. But what we find is one of the heroes, and again, I'm going to spoil some things, has this advisor who's this really slimy villain, just a criminal mastermind who has helped him.
This film's like Moriarty. He's really good.
Yeah, and he helps the character of Sima Chao-chun, who's this big hero in the movie, to sort of extend his network of influence by he basically is controlling like different escort agencies and different clans and stuff, and expanding his power. And his rival is the leader of Braveheart Hall, who's played by Ku Feng, and his name is Zhu Meng. And they're both very similar and both very different heroes. The Sima Chao-chun character is this powerful, unbeatable guy who's a little bit dim, right? Like he's kind of an idiot in this film, I think is the way they depict him. And Zhu Meng is this passionate hero who is like a manly man, but he adores dance and gracefulness. And he falls in love with this woman named Graceful or Diewu. Different points in the story, she's called different things. Butterfly. But he falls in love with her, and Little Gao befriends Zhu Meng, and they become sworn brothers. And then the Dong Lai character uses that to create sort of a not just create a rift between them, but completely destroy them in the hopes of paving the way for Sima Chao-chun. And as things come to a head, Sima Chao-chun realizes what Dong Lai is doing, and he resists him. He's humiliated and defeated, and then he and Zhu Meng have this incredible duel. But it's against the backdrop of this incident where Diewu cuts off her legs, or cuts off one of her legs, and so she's sort of dying in the background as this duel is unfolding, and the duel comes to an end when she is like on the cusp of death. And then the film sort of culminates with a big showdown between all of the characters and Zhu Donglai. And I'm glossing over so much, but
okay, there's because that's if that was all of the movie, that would still be a really good movie. But in addition to that, there's this other subplot running with the assassin with the wooden box. Yep. Which has its own emotional resonance, and it fully pays off and realizes during the runtime of the movie. And like, there's so much going on with like the development of the villain, and like because you get to see more and more of how he is intertwined with this plot, and you see his development and his movements as a villain behind the scenes, and his little victories and his little setbacks and things. There's a lot happening in this movie. It's like an opera. And all of it is harmonized in this spectacularly unified way that I don't even know how I'd approach, like, making something of this, like, scale and complexity and depth that is so watchable. Like, the movie does do one thing that makes it a little hard to follow, but actually it's not bad structurally when you get right down to it, because it will show you the outcome of something first. It'll show you this thing, and you're like, what the hell just happened? And then immediately it will slow down a little and back up just a touch and explain that thing to you.
Yeah,
that happens 3 or 4 times in the movie, and you don't see that a lot. That's like a kind of a Quentin Tarantino thing. You might see that in as far as a Western movie, but it is like perfected in this movie. And initially, when I didn't realize that's what they were doing, I was lost a lot, and I started becoming frustrated. But then as I realized they were consistently going to do that, I was like, oh, okay. So I'm just supposed to enjoy the surprise along with the characters. I get it now. So that was a neat little technique, I thought.
I mean, Chor Yuen is a great director. And again, at some point, we're going to have to do Intimate Confessions of a Chinese Courtesan, because that is probably the best example of just what a good director he is, in my opinion. The title often throws people, but it really you once you see the opening scene, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And
Brennan, I have learned one thing about Wuxia movies from this whole experience with you is that I will never judge one by its title.
yeah, no, that's a very good point. Now I will say the title is not misleading. The title is indicative of the kind of content of that film, but it's not just this like exploitative sort of film that uses sex to kind of sell itself. It really is it really handles it in a way that's like just it takes the subject very seriously, it's one of his most beautifully shot films. There's a couple of other ones from his earlier years that are particularly well shot, and that's one of the best ones. But this is another one, and this is later on, obviously, and so he does things a little bit differently. But like I said, like you were saying, you can see those little techniques that he uses, and again, we don't want to oversell it because this is an older movie. This is a 1980 Shaw Brothers film. It's all done in sets and stuff, and so sometimes.
I recognize some of those sets, by the way.
What was that?
I recognize almost every set, by the way. At this point, been like, okay, I know where they got this one first.
Yeah. Oh, that's the pavilion that they use in every movie, and that's this, and they just moved this around, and yeah, you do start to notice all of the structures. But a lot of times, what happens is people will be imagining a film from the '90s or the 2000s or even today when I describe a movie like this, and so I don't want to mislead anybody. It still is an older film. But by the standards, it's really good. It looks visually very, it's carefully, like, not only the shots carefully framed and everything, but like you can tell the outfit coordination is very carefully selected to match the drapes and match the tone of the wood, and like everything is just sort of thought of almost like it's a painting.
Oh, and also, speaking of the sets and the set design, even though I did recognize them, they have very distinctly unified the character of different areas in this movie with the characters that inhabit them, such as that there's a strong through line that connects them in your mind. There's like an emotional resonance that brings the sets to life as characters. So even though they were working on what is clearly a very limited budget, and they were reusing sets from other movies, or maybe they originated this movie and they reused them later, they still were able to bring forth the actual environments as they existed within the context of the movie so far forward in your mind that they have the same kind of they have a sort of impact on me as an audience member that I usually reserve purely for characters. I was like, oh, I know where they are now. And so you're never lost in the movie, and you always kind of know why a scene is set in the place it is set. So I don't want to again, it's not a 90s or later movie. So if you're looking for flaws in it that like a more modern viewpoint would see, yeah, okay, their sets, their matte paintings, that, but. That's like judging like Sinbad, the Golden Voyage of Sinbad, by those standards.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly the right comparison. This is like the Shaw Brothers movies have almost a golden age of Hollywood look to them. Do you know what I mean? They got like that when like all the sets in the studios were really big, and it uses the set structure that it has very well, and I think that. A lot of times that's more evocative. And again, we're going to talk about gaming anyway, so I'm going to bring it to gaming here. One of my favorite setting is Ravenloft. And the thing that sort of drew me to Ravenloft was the artwork of Stephen Fabian. And the artwork of Stephen Fabian is not realistic looking. It looks very stylistic, and it also kind of has like a fogginess that you might see in like an old Universal or old Hammer movie. And those are done on sets, a lot of them. But the sets often add to this sense of storytelling. Do you know what I mean? In a way that really being there doesn't. And I like gritty movies that are shot outside, perfectly fine. But I feel like a lot of times we've kind of thrown the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to sets, and people just aren't accustomed to them. But if you are open to the effect that a set can have on you, it creates kind of a sense of theater that's lost if you're just filming it outdoors all the time. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons for the operatic vibe of this movie, is that there is a certain kind of uncanny valley artificiality that you do detect because of the use of scenes and matte paintings, but it doesn't really detract from it. It's an element that they leverage to the advantage of the movie.
Yeah.
Actually, I've got a small divergence based on technical limitations as it applies to gaming in the terms of video games. I'm going to bring up, you brought up the old Hammer Brothers movies. Silent Hill does something similar. The technological limitations of early PlayStation 2 games were such that they couldn't fully map the environment. So they had this like fog that encased the town that hid the load screen. So like right past that fog, there were these choppy loading lines. But you didn't see that as a player. What you saw was this mysterious pall of fog around you that concealed everything. And the designers of that game knew to use your lack of information to make it more horrifying. So that limitation actually made the game feel claustrophobic in a way that's really conducive to the horror atmosphere.
Yeah.
So you can do that. You can use your illusion.
Well, like, for example, I'm looking at the scene right now when Sima Chao-chun goes to Braveheart Hall when it's in ruins. Do you know the scene that I'm thinking of? And,
yeah, I know.
And like the whole place is in ruins, and there's like a really beautiful sunset that's obviously not a real sunset in the background. No. And there's this blind beggar, I think, who kind of, sort of very dramatically tells him the story of what happened to Braveheart Hall and how Cleats, the guy with the funny hair, sacrificed himself in the big battle, and
scalp, yeah.
And he frequently has that setup in movies that he's in, that actor. I don't know why, but that scene that wouldn't work in a real setting. Do you know what I mean? Like that, like the fact that it's a set is what makes that scene so gorgeous. And it also, I feel like the sets can actually immerse you more once you buy into the staginess of them. Do you know what I mean? Like it's kind of like how a cartoon can sometimes draw you in a way that a live action film can't.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's that sort of effect. The surrealness of it. It's dreamlike in a way, and it kind of pulls you in more.
It is, and it makes it. Whenever you are able to control the environment with that degree of detail and specificity, and you can do that in a cartoon, you can do that with a set, you make it a stronger element that a writer or a director or someone who's using that visual media can use to make a part of the story like obvious to you. Like to give another example, the movie Akira and the manga that it's based off of, the setting of that, the environment of that, and the fact that the artist could control it with 100% capability made it feel like this huge, impersonal, industrial nightmare of a place to live. And you can take pictures of a city, but you can't really do that unless you have a set.
Yeah.
You can't really contrast, for example, Die Hard, which was shot on location a lot in an actual building. I think that might be wrong there, but it looked like an actual building versus like Dredd, the more modern Judge Dredd movie, where they have a bunch of sets that are made artificially to look very much like an industrial hellscape. Yeah. One of them feels like a nightmarish tower of a distant and hideous dystopian future, and one of them just feels like a modern office building. Yeah. And that difference in tone is only possible because you have the ability to control the environment of the set, which you can't get if you're just filming a city.
Another good example would be the '92 Dracula film, which used a lot of sets.
Yeah.
And that's probably the apex of like what you can achieve with using sets. And I think at their best, Shaw Brothers movies, they get into that territory of it just really creates atmosphere. Now, one of the things I wanted to go over, too, is I wanted to get your reaction to different parts of this film. Because, I've given my opinion on this a million times, so I don't think people are probably bored to tears with my thoughts. But what did you feel about the leg chopping scene? Let's start there, because that's one of the more striking scenes in the film.
It is. It is like a song and dance number, which I wasn't prepared for to start it off with.
And actually, you know what? Because a lot of people might not have watched the movie before, why don't I explain what happens in the scene, and then you give your reaction.
Let's give them the whole thing first, and then I'll give you my reaction.
So there's a whole lot of stuff that happens leading up to this, but basically, Little Gao and Jumung are both invited by Dong Lai to the same banquet. using Daewoo as kind of the bait, basically. I think she invites both of them, or she invites little Gao, and and somebody informs Zhumeng that she will be there, basically. And the whole purpose of it is to get them to both be there, and to have it revealed that little Gao has slept with the woman that Zhumeng is in love with, and just destroy them all in one sweep there. And when Daewoo realizes that she's been used, when Graceful realizes that she's been used, she speaks to little Gao and tells him that she was like, her love to him was real. And then she speaks to Zhumeng, and she asks if he, she says something to him to the effect of, "You really admired my legs," or something like that. And he said, "Yes, they're the most graceful legs in the world." And she cuts off one of her legs and hands it to Zhumeng, and he freaks out. He completely freaks out. And she hops away, and he runs after her. And he's just completely shattered. And then, little Gao is, I think, already departed by this point. And so that's the scene. What was your reaction?
Okay, so I think I compared it to Hitchcock whenever I was watching it. Because Hitchcock has this famous speech where he's like, if the audience knows there's a bomb under the table, but the characters don't, they're just playing cards or whatever, the tension in the scene is mounting for the audience no matter what is happening above the table. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of feel you go into with this scene. It starts off, like I said, with a musical number, which is a full-on musical number. There's a song, dance, everything. It's very beautiful and theatrical. But while you're watching that, the setup of the scene that predates that by just a few seconds is all these characters that are in this really dangerous and explosive web of relationships slowly coming into the scene. So you've got the master manipulator, then you have both the people he's manipulated and the person he's manipulating them with. And so even though the scene itself, the music part of that scene it's innocent and beautiful without that context, with that context you're watching the whole thing with this really powerful apprehension, because you like these characters and you know that they've been put on a collision course by this manipulative bad guy. So the whole time you're watching the music scene, and it goes for a while, the tension is drawn out like a knife. So that was really fun to start off with. Also, it's a very beautiful musical number.
Yeah, and that music, I know that the opening is sung by Jenny Tseng, and I think she sang that song too, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I'm willing to bet that I missed wherever the lyrics of that song linked into what was going on with the movie. This is one of the most things that's going to really reward a repeat viewing, because I'm sure that if I watch it, I'm going to be like, oh, I get you. Mm-hmm. I see song. I see how clever you were.
Well, and another interesting thing about the song is actually Jenny Tseng is Alexander Fu Sheng's wife, or was. So, he played Little Gao. So it's an interesting part of the film. But yeah, that scene really struck me when I first saw it. I was number one, martial arts movies. We were talking about this before. I think you pointed it out. Mutilation is a common thing in kung fu movies and in martial arts movies, and the one-armed swordsman, all kinds of things like that. But a lot of times they're sort of trying to one up each other, like who can be more extreme in in the limb chopping area. But this was pretty. I mean, this was quite up there, I felt. And also it wasn't just a meaningless, I'm being stubborn and I'm cutting off my leg. It was a really deep moment in the movie where this is the thing that embodies what she is, and she cuts it off because Zhumeng's admiration for it is sort of the thing that's causing all of this conflict between. Do you know what I mean?
To put it in the term, really fancy sounding terms, it is a shocking externalization of the emotional state of the characters. It shows very physically and grotesquely the emotional wound that is being dealt to them in this scene, and it's an amazing culmination. Yeah. So that's how I judge it. And it is shocking because she straight up grabs a sword and cuts off her leg, and then she not only cuts it off, but she hops bleeding out of there and crawls herself up the stairs. The guy holding it, and she hands it to the guy. He's holding it, and he's got this moment of just absolute, not even being present shell shock. Yeah. And he snaps out of it and runs after her, completely losing his composure. It's it's startling.
Yeah.
It's what it is. It's a very startling scene.
This is probably one of the best Gu Feng roles you'll ever see. He's good in anything he's in. He's sort of like a really solid supporting character actor. Do you know what I mean? And he plays villains. He does all kinds of things. He can be anything in a movie. But this role to me is he is like the thing that really carries the emotional weight of this movie. And that scene's one where you see it. And I think another thing about this scene is, it could produce laughter. Like, you see her cut off her leg, and then she picks up the thing, and she hops over. And I'm sure people do laugh when they see that for the first time sometimes. But I didn't laugh when I first saw that. I was just hit by the weight of the scene. And I think that, it takes something that again, might be sort of seen as, this is an extreme thing we're doing for effect, or this is meant to be shocking. And it really, it somehow has all this emotional weight to it that... And again, I think the Gu Feng performance has a lot to it. The patience that they have sort of setting up this whole scene has quite a bit to do with it as well.
Because it's the culmination of everything you felt and seen in the scene so far. Yeah. So it's not just that we cut to her leg getting cut off. And I think in a less skilled Wuxia movie, you would have seen like this just as a flashback, and then she cut off her leg. And then this happened. I see that a lot in Wuxia. And this didn't do it. It took its time. And again, by the way, before that, for the rest of the movie before that, there's a lot of really big leaps in cuts between events that give you really impactful scenes. This one stops that trend and slows it way down. So your attention is fully invested in this scene because you're like, well, why are we still watching this? Why isn't this getting jumped over? What's so important about this?
Yep.
Again, masterful construction of the pacing of the movie.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, and I think the next, not the next scene, but the next related scene to this, where we then have Daewoo dying and Jumong caring for her. But it follows on the heel of Sima Chao-chun confronting Dong Lai and then getting attacked by all of Dong Lai's minions and being kicked out of his own sect. And essentially, the thing that Dong Lai is doing to all these men is he's trying to defeat them without even having to kill them. He would kill them happily. He doesn't care. He's shown to be a complete sort of merciless, cruel person. But he's not going to expend any more energy than he needs to. And he feels that by doing what he did to Zhumeng and Little Gao, he's effectively defeated them. They're no longer who they were, so they might as well be dead. And then he kind
of hit on Little Gao, didn't he? On top of that,
what?
He also put a hit out on Little Gao, didn't he? On top of that,
he did. He had the man with the box. He sent him after him. That's what the whole subplot with the opium smoking master is, where he gets the he has like this special document and he needs to get it from him so he can send the man with the box after him. It's funny because Chor Yuen's known for sort of sometimes getting confusing with the plot, but this is one where it's like the richness of the plot it's not ever confusing in that way. It's
not really.
And so, but anyways, so Sima Chao-chun is literally face down in the rain. And and he has no confidence in himself anymore, and he just basically realizes his whole empire is a lie, that it's all been built by this Dong Lai guy who's been using him, and he could have pretty much basically what Dong Lai is doing is he's creating an empire, and he needs a face for that empire, and Sima Chao-chun was the hero that he needed to serve that role, but it could be anybody else. And so later in the movie, Little Gao volunteers himself as being the new Sima Chao-chun for that reason. But what ends up happening is Sima Chao-chun confronts Zhumeng as Daewoo is dying in the background up on like a cliff area. There's like a pavilion cliff or something that she's dying at. And it's just this super dramatic scene where Zhumeng is trying to get all of his men to kill Sima Chao-chun, because Sima Chao-chun and his organization are responsible for killing all their people, for making all of their mothers and sisters into prostitutes, and all these things that have befallen them. And none of the men can strike Sima Chao-chun because he's so pathetic. and he doesn't have he's not even barely holding his weapon, and so he looks to one of his Zhumeng looks to one of his heroes, and he's like, you've always been, and this is a point where the translation gets funky. In the movie, the subtitle reads, "You're such a hunk." But what it's really supposed to, he's basically saying, you're such a tough guy, like you're such a tough hero, why can't you kill him?
Yeah, I saw you're such a hunk, and I read it to mean like that he was like one of those like walking bricks where he's really strong but dumb. Yeah. That's kind of how the guy was portraying him. Like there wasn't a lot of nuance in this guy. He was real straightforward. So I think that that maybe the term they were trying to translate something along the lines of big muscular idiot.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think something along those lines, but it definitely wasn't hunk as we would use the term.
Yeah, I think that that one went a little south.
But I think that but that scene is just so unbelievable. That is like I in fact I do sometimes I'll just go to that scene and just watch that scene because that's like the heart of the movie. Like that's the moment of the film where you get the scene with Yue Hua cutting off her leg is a big sort of dramatic payoff scene, but this is like everything that the movie is built towards. I mean, there's stuff that comes after, but this is to me this is the heart of the movie.
It is. Yeah, you pegged it. This is the scene that gives you kind of the thesis for this movie too, which is our identity is based on what we do, not like just our laurels.
Yeah.
Not thought we were, but what we are doing now. So that kind of hit me really close to home too, because I'm just like I've had to fight with depression a lot in my life, and a lot of times you just come to this point where you're like, you know what, I'm getting through today. I'm just gonna keep struggling. That's my decision, and like that's how they get themselves back. That's how they bring themselves back from this despondency they've both been cast into, and they turn it around. It's a scene where they kind of redeem themselves to each other.
Well, and what's oh, go ahead.
Well, even though they're bitter enemies, they're like allies and friends after that. So,
well, they survive because of the fight, because they're able to still fight each other. So he basically says, you're still Sima Chaochun, I'm still Zhumeng. This sword is still good, right? I have my sword, you have your sword. Let's, they're still both fighters, basically. They're still both swordsmen who can, and again, that's contrasted with Yue Hua, who she's lost her leg. She cannot dance anymore. She is no longer a dancer, so she is effectively dead in the movie, and that's why she dies. Do you know what I mean? I mean, obviously, the reason she dies is massive blood loss, but I mean,
from extracting her leg.
But I mean that, and this is a theme that is like explicitly called out of the book, where there's a poem in it. It says something to the effect of the dancer dances, the swordsman fights, the musician plays. It's just one of these things where you are what you do. And the moment you cease to be whatever it is you do, then you no longer exist. It's an interesting sort of reflection for a film like this, and yeah. So I don't know. Were there any other scenes or anything that you wanted to talk about before we get into the gaming context of the movie?
Let me think. I really liked. We haven't really talked much about the guy with the box, but I really liked his character a lot. I liked him as a rival who is not villainous and is not necessarily always going to be a rival or in an adversarial role. I liked his cool box because it's filled with the essence of 13 weapons, and I don't know if that's something that translates super well, but he could basically turn it into whatever weapon he wanted. It seemed like
so.
That was
Let's talk about. So number one, this is where I think the James Bond influence comes in the movie, because you have this device that it's like right out of a spy movie almost. And Gulong has a lot of these kinds of things, and this is in the book. I can't remember exactly how it functions in the book, but my impression of it has always been that, if I recall, it's got a lot of moving components in it and a lot of parts. And if you're sufficiently intelligent and sufficiently agile, or dexterous, you can put together a weapon on the fly to respond to pretty much any foe that you're facing. And so that's why he wants to give the box to Little Gao, because Little Gao is nimble enough and smart enough to do it. So that's that was the, I believe, his reasoning there. But it's basically just an oblong box, and you never really see what they do. You just know that he manipulates a bunch of little like gears or something in it, and he pulls out the weapon that he needs. And so it's it's not you kind of have to leave it to your imagination to figure out what's actually going on inside the box.
Yeah, at one point they open it and there's just like this blinding flash of like color and light inside, and the little Gao like collapses. I thought it was supposed to be something magical. So
that was no, I think that was a trap he set on the box. So
I get it. Okay, I'm dumb. You're right. That probably was just a trap. Okay, and I think that you're right about the James Bond influence. I think it was a deeper, just British influence, though, because remember that scene where he's trying to give the box to Little Gao, and he's like, "Okay, you can leave here, but you have to pass this test." And he whips out the teapot with the two, the two teapots and the two cups, and he's like, "You have to choose which one of these to drink from, and one of them is poisoned." That's a study in Scarlet. That's from Crimson from And it's all, they did it in Princess Bride too, but like that's a Sherlock Holmes thing. It's straight out from Sherlock Holmes. So yeah, I think the British influence, the British literary influence on that character is pretty clear.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think that definitely, because it is like the same exact situation as Study in Scarlet, and I think that that was the character who has the box is played by Yue Hua. And I'm probably going to mispronounce his name, but I think his character's name is Zhao Lei Suo, or something to that effect. I don't know exactly how it's pronounced, but it translates, I believe, into teardrop or tear stain. And so the way it was explained to me is when you're reading the book, you just keep seeing this name that says tear stain all over, blood stain all over the it's a I think it's bloody tear, blood stain, something like that. But don't quote me because I don't know Mandarin. But it's
is it Mandarin? I think it is.
Well, I mean, the version we saw, I think was I think it was Mandarin. But I think the names on the Hong Kong Movie Database might be the Cantonese versions. I don't know. But either way, he is a really interesting character. It's also a really cool role for Yue Hua, because this is Yue Hua after he's really been a veteran actor for a while. If you go back and watch, have you seen Come Drink With Me yet? I don't know if we've seen that.
Oh, Christ, I don't remember. Probably not.
So Come Drink With Me is an early Cheng Pei film. We'll probably have to watch it at some point just to cover all of our bases. But it's also an early movie that he's in. And he's very young in that film. And the difference between him in that movie and this movie could not be more striking. And it's purely a product of he's just a veteran actor now, and he is so thoroughly owning this role as this character. And so again, I think that's another reason why this movie really works. A lot of the actors they're really experienced at this stage. Like between him, between Gu Feng, and between Alexander Fu Sheng, who's at a sort of a physical peak. In fact, I think he might have injured himself during this film. I think he broke his leg or something when filming this. And Derek Yee is fabulous as Zhu Donglai. That's a really good role for Derek Yee, in my opinion. But yeah. So I don't know, any other scenes or thoughts?
There's a lot to appreciate in this movie. No, I will leave with the caveat that I want to watch it again, and I think that if you're interested, this is on Amazon Prime. You should watch it probably more than once to get a lot out of it. It's definitely one that's worth your time and your investment. Yeah. Here's
what I'll say: go to Amazon Prime, look up Heroes Shed No Tears. Make sure it's the 1980 version, because there's another movie called Heroes Shed No Tears that I think came out in the mid 80s. That's a totally different kind of movie. So make sure it's the 1980 version by Chor Yuen, and watch the beginning with the music. And if you don't feel like you want to keep watching after that, then fine, back out. But if you feel intrigued, continue watching. It's like you said, it's on Amazon Prime. So if you have that service, you can watch it there. It's a really good movie, in my opinion. I watched it like 5 times. After I watched it, and then I immediately watched it again, and then I watched it the next day, and then again, and I just kept watching it.
Yeah, I could see that reaction. Like, I seriously want to watch it again, and not just because it's dense, but just because it's entertaining. Like, a lot of movies that are dense like this tend to drag at certain parts.
Yep.
This is nothing. There's no fat on this movie. It goes right to the heart of every important scene. It skips over everything unnecessary, and it has a powerful unity that makes it so that you're never lost while you're watching it. Like, it's really watchable, and it's really really deep, which is a rare combination.
I think this movie, I I watched it again a bunch of times because I wanted to figure out why I was so intrigued by it. Like, I couldn't figure out what it was that made me like the movie so much, and so I just wanted to figure that out. But getting into the gaming stuff, I don't know. A lot of times when we do these wuxia movies, there's something that's really easy to sort of zero in on in a gaming context. Like, oh, that would make a great dungeon, or oh, this would make a great adventure concept. This is a little bit more difficult, I think. I think there's a lot that's gameable here, but it's one of the movies that it's one of the reasons why people perceive wuxia as a challenging genre to game, because this one relies entirely on the drama and certain things happening between the characters. So I was curious what your thoughts on the gaming of it would be.
Well, this is one of those games that, or one of those shows that I can see why a game like Legends of the Wulin got created based on watching this, because Legends of the Wulin has a lot to say about how the heroes in the Jianghu, like the relationships that they have and the emotional context of those relationships and how those define a character. And so it's difficult to gamify that in the way that it's easy to like gamify, like, say, a dungeon, like a kung fu dungeon or a kung fu technique or a power, something like that. That's something that you can pretty easily put mechanics onto. But whenever you get into a complex social relationship that's still comprehensible to the people that are within it and allow you to make strategic maneuvers within it, like our villain does, he's a real social manipulator. That's something that's a little more sophisticated.
Yep.
That requires like this framework of being able to like put relationships in the context of them in some kind of like key, and it's hard to map that in the way you can map a geographic location. So and
it can get weird if you do it too much. Like if you mechanize too much of that stuff, it can actually create distance between the player and whatever it is they're supposed to have an emotional connection to. So
because it's one thing to give you an example of how mechanization can actually hurt you. This is something I played. I had a character in a classic D&D game who was a paladin, and his name was Terrell because it's a cool name. And shut up. He was lawful good, and he kind of got lawful dark at a certain point. He became an inquisitor, and at one point he was going to face. He was on the penultimate encounter. It was the mini boss before the main lich who we were trying to vanquish. And what happened was we were playing in the 3rd edition of Dungeons & Dragons, and the GM whipped out this class, the Evangelist, I think it was called, who had a power where they talk to you, and if you failed a will save, your alignment shifted to the opposite.
Okay.
So what happened was this guy who had been consistently role-playing as like this ever-darkening paragon of good just became a gibbering psycho and just started killing his party mates in this penultimate encounter, completely heel-turning because he failed a roll. Like, that wasn't a very satisfying conclusion to Terrell. He died because of that, by the way. But that wasn't a very satisfying emotional conclusion to him because I lost all of my ability to actually roleplay the character because the mechanics decided that I was going to be a different character now.
Well, and that's one of those things where I think that's certain mechanics have the danger of disrupting certain styles of play, and so that strikes me as something where it's the sort of mechanic that it just didn't fit your style. Somebody else might have reacted a totally different way than you, but for that reason, I'm always wary. I'll give you an example. Like I'm working on a wuxia game right now, and and me and the co-writer were going over some abilities we wanted, and obviously I don't want to do what I did in Ogre Gate. I want to do something much more streamlined and a little more free form and focused on role play. But I wanted to make sure a character like Zudong Lai was viable in the game, and so. And just intelligent characters in general. So I came up with an ability that sort of lets you retcon things. Like, say if you have this ability, if you're talking to another character, and the character drinks a cup of wine, you can say, "Oh, well, you didn't see that I poisoned that wine a moment ago when you were talking with so and so." And there's usually a role to make sure that the person didn't actually see it or whatever. But it's a retcon, and it's not going to work for a lot of styles of play. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
And so what I did was I tagged it as optional style because I knew some people are just not going to like it, and it's got to, so the GM will probably need to approve it to let it in the game.
Spirit of the Century did something similar to that. There's a power where you're a master of disguise, And so you can declare yourself in a scene in disguise as one of the NPCs in that scene, and you just make the roll. And if you do,
I've seen that mechanic. I think in a few games actually, because unless I played a version of that game and didn't realize it, because I remember seeing that ability somewhere. Those kinds of things are always tricky because not everybody's anything that's potentially immersion breaking or anything that's potentially style shattering for people is something you have to kind of consider.
We're still, as game players and designers, I think we're still developing a dialogue about talking about that stuff. Because I think I came to you the other day when I was talking about, I saw some thread on TG or something where they were talking about 4th edition, and there was a big argument that happened in that thread, and both of the people that were arguing were really articulate and smart, or whoever many people look like, too. Mm-hmm. And I was watching it with great interest because I was like, I had a dissatisfying experience with D&D 4th Ed. I agree with this guy. And then as the thing went on, I was like, because he kept, the guy who liked 4th Ed kept calling him a task. He was like, well, but why didn't you like that? Well, how would you not be able to do that with different versions of the same game? And eventually the guy was just like, you're right. I guess it is just a thing of taste. And I became defeated argumentatively along with that poster. I was like, wait, he's right. Well, there's some dimension of taste there that is just hard to quantify. We don't have a good vocabulary for it yet.
Well, here's what I say, because I was involved in the discussions around 4E when it came out, both in the live actual table I played at and online. And there was it was kind of like a rhetorical masterclass, because eventually you did see sort of things like this kind of argumentation forming. I think when it comes down to it, it's really hard to say for sure. Like, all I know is I didn't like 4E. That's all I really know.
Yeah.
And anything that I offer up as an explanation is just me attempting to explain it. Kind of like I don't really know why I like Heroes Shed No Tears. I can give you my reasons, but if you dissect those reasons, say, hey, but Brendan, you said you liked it because of the emotional resonance from this scene, but what about that movie you said you hated 10 months ago that did almost exactly the same thing? Like, it's really difficult to understand why you like something and why you don't, and I think gamers like to
we're an analytical bunch.
I'm sorry?
We are an analytical bunch, and I think that maybe that there's a point of regression with analysis where we're kind of going below the threshold of why we ever really liked it. Like, I mean, in a very brief way, I liked Heroes Shed No Tears because it brought me on an emotional journey that I enjoyed in a way that was palatable to me and immersed me. That's the real reason I liked it. And you can do all the same stuff that Heroes Shed No Tears did and fail to do those things for me as an audience member, and I won't like it. And no matter, you could regress that analysis to the point where you're talking about the scene structure and the pacing and the characterization and the elements and even the things that happen, and you won't necessarily hit on why it had that impact.
Yeah, no,
because it's personal.
And just to get it back to the 4E thing, I think what was going on a lot is, like, we were really struggling to come up with, like, well, I know I don't like this mechanic because it's jarring to me for some reason. And so one that came up a lot, and again, I'm not trying to rehash the 4E battles because I really don't have any emotional investment in that topic anymore. But
it's worthwhile to talk about as far as, like, trying to articulate a language of talking about RPGs, though. It's worthwhile in that regard.
And let me preface it with saying that my old business partner Bill actually really enjoyed 4th edition, and I didn't. So we had a very frequent. Well, I mean, it wasn't like argumentative because we were friends, and it went on long enough that we just had a conversation over a long period of time. But I got a better sense of what he didn't like or what he liked about it, and he got a better sense of what I didn't like about it. And but I think with something like 4th edition, people would they might complain about, like, the ability come and get it. Do you know what I mean? Or they might say, I don't like that. Like, the big thing for me, I think, was that all of the abilities were kind of set to, like, encounter daily and things like, and it just seemed kind of weird to me.
It was I think it was Justin Alexander who articulated that as well. He had a special name for it.
Well, he called it dissociated mechanic, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how everything was keyed to that Vancian X times per X or X times per Y. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so you had martial maneuvers that had a Vancian element to them for some reason. But that's exactly what he brought up in the disassociated mechanics discussion, is that doesn't make any sense. How do you know factually in character that you can only do this maneuver one time before you rest to do it again?
No, and people can check out his argument if they want. But what I'm saying is slightly different. I'm saying that for whatever reason, I didn't like that, right? And so, but in these conversations, people would say, well, but Brendan, you like the Barbarian, right? The Barbarian has rage X times per day. What's wrong with the Barbarian? And there's no really good response to that, because there isn't anything wrong with the Barbarian.
Not really.
And so I think what I eventually realized, and what often happens in these conversations, is you'll say something, somebody will refute what you say, and you will not have the response to what they say, and you'll be defeated. But it doesn't mean that your opinion is invalid or wrong. It just means you don't know what the next step in that discussion is. What I realized is that it's not about just something being Vancian. Do you know what I mean? Because that's non-magical. It's about the quantity. Do you know what I mean? It's about, this was something that was just sort of, either isolated into magic in the system or occasionally popped up in certain classes here and there, that then became ubiquitous in the whole system. And by making it ubiquitous, it was just all you could see. Do you know what I mean? If you only saw it once in a while, it's not a big deal. And so I think one of the consequences of these kinds of debates is people will really latch on to an explanation that they find for themselves as to why they don't like something. Like they'll say, I don't like, the dissociated thing or whatever it is. But that can become because you're hyper aware of it now, it might bother you in a way it wouldn't have bothered you before. Do you know what I mean? Because it was really only an issue of quantity when you actually noticed it. You didn't notice it when it was the Barbarian. You only noticed it when I did it to everything else in the system. So what I've been trying to do, and I don't know why we're talking about this at this point, because we're kind of going off the rails a little bit, but I've been trying to do
we're talking about how you're introducing those kind of those social mechanics, because that is a sticky topic, and the whole timber of this conversation is that you're right. There's some jarring element whenever you introduce certain kinds of mechanics to a game. How do you do it in a way that isn't jarring? How do you do it in a way that works tonally with the rest of the game? What are the zones you can really explore with that? And that's a huge topic. So it's easy to meander around in it.
No, and actually what I was trying to say is now what I've been doing is I've been trying to get back to my natural gamer state. Like in martial arts, there's this concept of baby mind or child mind, where you get back to that stage before you knew everything, so that when you learn a new ability or technique or whatever, you're looking at it fresh and you're seeing it for what it is. You're not imposing like your karate concepts or your Muay Thai concepts onto it as you're learning it. I feel like I'm trying to get back to that point with my gaming, so that I'm not as affected by all of the discourses that have been happening online around it, because I feel like the discourses have in many ways led me astray. And when it comes to things like social mechanics, increasingly I feel like we should just kind of not worry. I mentioned the style thing almost to say it shouldn't be as big of a concern. All you really need to do is just point it out, like, hey, this might be an issue, but you can still have mechanics like that if you want to. But my taste for a movie like this is to rely more heavily on tools than mechanics. I think techniques like GMing techniques and adventure structure techniques can be really handy for making something like this a viable adventure.
Absolutely. And to reference Justin Alexander again, the way he looked at social encounters with things like the 3-clue rule and node-based prep and the conspiramid he ported in from Night's Black Agents, like all of those are just techniques that a GM uses. They aren't really mechanics in as much. They're just strategies for making that prep something you can use quickly and intuitively while you're running. You're right. You can use those to make these things happen. Actually, one of the biggest challenges I'm facing right now with writing Tiansheng is doing that for all the content. So there's a unified... I want to have a unified conversation with GMs of the game where I'm talking about, like, okay, there's different kinds of content. Here's how you work it all and orchestrate it all together without getting overwhelmed. This is a problem I have a lot, is just getting overwhelmed by the amount of stuff I want in the game.
What I would say for a story like this is what you probably want. Number one is you want to sort of what this movie has is like a really clearly drawn martial world, and so you want to have a populated martial world where you know who all of the major sects are, who the sect leaders are, things like that, and what all of them want, and but at the same time, it's got this enormous simplicity because everything's being folded in to Sima Chao Chun's escort company, right? So like that, it's a very binary martial world. You have Sima Chao Chun and you have Zhu Meng, and so it kind of simplifies things. But basically, you need to have this. You need to have these characters and the sects in place, but you also need a villain. Do you know what I mean? And so I did something a couple of years ago, actually with the person that I'm co-writing the Wuxia game with now, where he played in one of my campaigns and he joined. And I think he had actually translated the story of this movie, the original Gulong movie. He had translated it. It's available online at Wuxia World. And I was a super fan of the movie. And so that was the thing that we were talking about when he came into my campaign. And we had the idea of having him be the villain of the campaign in the style of Zhu Donglai. And so he was a character named Hidden Arrow. And basically nobody knew he was really the villain. Do you know what I mean? He was just presented as a normal player character, and the whole time he was sort of scheming. And so I guess what I'm saying is recruiting a player as a villain is a really interesting way to get a Zhu Donglai type character going. You're not going to get the same exact result. You're not, this movie relies on a very specific set of things happening. And you're not necessarily going to get those specific set of things. But if you have a really powerful villain character embedded in the party and you have this conflict going on, I think it can lead to similar types of scenarios.
Actually, it's fun. It's fun you mentioned that because I agree with you, and I agree with you so much that my writing of one of my games is based on that. Role-playing games are very cooperative exercises. So at one point, I got this wild hair in my head that wouldn't go away, which was, well, what if it was competitive instead? And that has very slowly boiled into Parliament of Crocodiles, which is a game that borrows a lot, by the way, from the Chronicles of Amber game, where all of the players can cooperate. That actually helps them out a lot. But each one of them ultimately has what is basically a mutually exclusive goal to win the game. And so it's a competitive role-playing game.
No, well, number one, there's a role-playing game people might want to check out called Conflict Role-Playing. That actually, it's more focused on the battle grid type stuff, but I think it also gets into the RP. And I actually did contribute a little bit to it, full disclosure, when it first came out. But it's an interesting RPG, and it's a D20, and it's basically about having big battles between the characters. But I've run competitive style games. Now what I will say about competitive style games is you have to absolutely be sure everybody's bought into the concept. And a lot of people will sometimes say they bought into the concept and not really be bought into the concept.
It's more that they want to be agreeable.
Yeah,
I've been that guy.
Yeah,
I'm not down on that guy, but don't be that guy.
So number one, don't be that guy. But number two, I think if you're the GM, check and make sure everybody's on board with it, and then look for signs that people aren't on board with it, even if they said they were. And as long as you do those two things, I think your bases are covered. But if you do it and it works well, it can be really fun. I have one player who loves this kind of stuff, and so when the opportunity presents itself, I will happily run this kind of campaign. It's how I always run my Crime Network campaigns. But you can run a martial arts setting like that, and I think Heroes Shed No Tears would be a perfect example of how to do that, because the challenge is if you're doing this specific scenario, Sima Chao Chun and Zhu Meng very rarely are together. So you have to be a little bit more free flowing with time and space, I think, so that you're not doing this thing where you're constantly at the mercy of, well, I'm going to travel up north now so nobody can do anything this whole time that I'm doing something. If the party is going to be effectively separated into two or three groups, you need to figure out a way to make that work, and that's difficult. That, I think, takes a lot of finesse and understanding your players, and so. But I think again, being here's what I do when I'm doing that. I have a timer and I give everybody 20 minutes. And,
I see.
And sometimes I get lazy with the timer. Like sometimes I'll realize, I didn't set the timer off. I better estimate how much time has gone by. Or I set the timer off and I look down and suddenly it's 35 minutes rather than 20 minutes.
I do that.
Yeah.
I hate timers for that very reason. I have kids and I time a lot of their like screen time and things like that. And I'll do the same thing. I'll get invested in doing my homework or something and I'll be like, uh-oh.
But here's the thing. It's not about the precise time. What matters is the fact that you are timing it and you're conscious of it. And so, by and large, and also 9 times out of 10, when I look down and it says 35 minutes, that's because it was so engaging and engrossing. Nobody really cared.
Almost, even if it only involves a few of the players and the GM, that's almost always a satisfying thing for the whole table because they're watching something that's engrossing and entertaining.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if it's that good, I wouldn't worry. I wouldn't be that strict with the timing myself because it's rare to get gaming that good. And when it does, you don't want some mechanical thing like timing to interrupt it halfway through. You want to resolve it. You want to get the whole thing.
Yeah. And so that's something that you would have to contend with, but you can definitely do it as a competitive thing where one player is playing a Zhumeng type guy, and one player is playing a Dong Lai type character. Another one is like a Sima Chao Chun. Another one is like a little Gao or a graceful character. You know what I mean? Those are really. I mean, there's also cleats. You might want to have a cleats in there.
Just a guy that's heroic right down to the core.
I
like cleats.
He was one of the best characters in the movie. But yeah, I mean, and that's basically a party, right? Like you have, like, what is that, 5 characters? So I mean, that's a party right there. And again, if it's a struggle to do it the way it's done in this movie, where tremendous distance can sometimes exist between the characters geographically, you could just set it in a single city. That would be a very easy way to.
You have to make it sprawl like that.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, the stuff you're talking about is all stuff I've been trying to find ways to address in Parliament, where, like, and I think I've shown that to you as well, where, like, geographically I don't do hexes. I do, like, chunks that have, like, certain things, and they just interlock. And moving between them is a lot easier because it's not so detailed like it is in, like, D&D, where the exploration is a bigger element. Sometimes the maneuvering between those things is enough. And, rather than linking it to time, I link the amount of like spotlight people have to the resolution, the attempt to resolve a single goal. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to get into this house to break into the safe. Okay, getting into the house, that's one goal. Breaking the safe is one goal. Getting out is one goal. So you tell me how you do it. We approach it. You roll, success or fail, do the fallout. Bam. Now we switch the spotlight geographically. Sometimes an entire city away. To someone else's turn. What are they trying to do? Well, they're trying to get into this nightclub, or they're trying to create this thing. So you can link it in more ways than just with time. You can also link it to resolution and in completely in-game actions. And you actually see that in board games, where a turn can have a variable length of time, but the things you resolve in the turn are all discrete, and there's a clear endpoint to them that lets the turn go, that lets the game continue going around.
I think too. Something else to consider is Hero Shed No Tears. It almost it takes place kind of close to the end of a campaign. Really, do you know what I mean? You can sort of crank this film into reverse and imagine all these characters at say like level 1, and that's really where things would start. And so if you do that, then what you have is this setting where you basically just drop off a bunch of level 1 martial heroes, and you say, look, this campaign is all about rising to the top. Go, become the biggest master you can, and defeat the competition. And if you do that, eventually you might end up at a point like you have in Heroes Shed No Tears. Like for example, in my Bonebreaker campaign, I can't remember what I called the campaign, but whatever it might have been my Disciples of Bonebreaking sect. I think it was the second big campaign I ran. I have a bunch of logs of it on the blog page, but basically the characters were unleashed into the world and told to rise as well as they can. And one of the characters ended up becoming an important sect leader. So he became kind of like a Sima Chao Chun, but it was complicated because he had a wife that was also the head of another sect that he sort of relied upon for things, and not everybody was 100% loyal necessarily, and most of the other members of his sect court were player characters of various stripes. So whenever you have a situation like that, it's really well suited for this kind of drama, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, again, that's something I'm going for in Parliament. I didn't mean to talk about my game a pile.
No, that's okay. That's totally fine.
This is the stuff that that excited me enough to continue working on Parliament, which is going to be forever away. But the idea that you just drop in really low level, and in Parliament's case, it's a bunch of monsters, vampires, and werewolves and such. But you drop someone like that into a big city with a lot of potential, and you're like, okay, the goal of the game is to become the biggest king of the monsters in this city. Go. You're right. You make things. You have to ad hoc solutions to the evolving tactical landscape. You have to bring together imperfect fusions of street gangs and dark magic and armies of sentient rats and all this stuff. And it makes a much more unique and it essentially customizes a game setting for you. Because a lot of times you'll come into a game setting after it's already kind of accreted and becomes something a little more solid, and so the players are there just kind of enjoying what's already there. But when you have a hand in creating that, it makes a wonderfully textured kind of thing, with a lot of holes that arise naturally. This guy. There's a secret entrance to this place that we forgot about because we installed it back then when we first made this, and then we forgot about it later on. This guy's not really loyal because when he was brought in, we just had to pay him, and we've been paying him less and less as time goes on because we don't have as much of a use for him, but he's still in a position of power. All that stuff happens naturally as you just kind of haphazardly stitch together the Frankenstein monster of your organization as a player, and that gives the rival players, or even just a completely different third party, all these wonderful launching on points to attack the integrity.
Sorry about that. That was my medication alarm.
That was the shill alarm. It means shut up, Joel.
No, that was my medication alarm. But I think the thing about that too is that players love building things. Do you know what I mean? It's really enjoyable to build up your own sect. And if you do, like that player character that had that sect of his own, that meant so much more to him than if I had sort of plopped him into a campaign where I said, boom, you're Zudong Lai, or I'm sorry, you're Sima Chao Chun, or you're being handed a sect and having actually built up a sect and taken control of it yourself would just mean so much more.
Hand in the creation of the history of the sect, it's extremely immersive and satisfying.
Yeah, so I would say consider starting before the movie takes place. Like instead of saying, okay, we're going to do. I mean, you can do it. You can say, let's play Hero Shed No Tears. But instead, what you can say is, okay, I want a campaign that is going to have all the groundwork to get to Hero Shed No Tears. Like it's going to have all the foundations will be there, and again, I think it's always a losing battle to aim exactly for what it is you're trying to emulate. Like saying, okay, it's got to be exactly like Hero Shed No Tears. Don't do that. Just say, this campaign, I can see a Dong Lai emerging. I can see a Sima Chao Chun emerging. I can see the kind of conflict that's going on emerging. Maybe it'll be another kind of conflict, but whatever happens will be in the spirit of what is going on in Hero Shed No Tears. It doesn't have to be a perfect match.
I think a perfect match is kind of like seeing a beautiful garden and then just making one out of paper that's a perfect replica. Like, it's not as good as just going and starting your own garden that won't be identical, because at least you actually grew a garden.
Yeah, no, and also in a case of a garden, my neighbor Vince, he might have a yard that's ideal for the type of garden that he has. But then when I go and try to do it in my yard, it just falls apart because I have like all these little hills and who knows, like the geography is different. And so
that's another good point too. Like, different campaigns will grow in different soil, and that soil is you and your abilities as a GM, the system you're using, the players you have, the situation you're all going through. Like, different campaigns can blossom in different things, and I think the best campaigns are the ones that blossom most fruitfully, not necessarily the ones that look exactly like the magazine, that are coming to some preconceived idea you have of the perfect campaign. The perfect campaign is the one you play and have fun in.
Yeah, no. In fact, I think the more pressure you put on yourself to have it perfectly be whatever, the less fun it can often be. Because I mean, again, it's a game. It's a game, so uncertainty is a factor. And if you have uncertainty on the table, you don't know how things are going to go. So you can't say, "Oh, well, Dong Lai will definitely betray Sima Chao Chun, and Diewu will definitely cut off her leg, and that will make Zhu Meng freak out, and then they'll have a big duel." That's getting into really heavy railroading territory if you're the GM, or it's like a rigged system. Do you know what I mean? Like,
where no matter what you roll or what you do, it will result in legs getting chopped off, hearts getting.
I mean, and I think there's nothing wrong with baking in a degree of gravity that sort of encourages things to go in that direction, but it should. I don't think it should ever be like this has to happen. I think that it's better if you just sort of lean into whatever is going on at the table. Again, if you go after the spirit of what you're trying to emulate rather than the exact details, I think it's better off, because I think there's a really good spirit to Heroes Shed No Tears that could be applied to any campaign. And the way I tend to use these movies is when things are going on in my campaigns, and the players are taking actions, I start to see things and it'll be like, oh, this is kind of reminding me of this movie now. Maybe it would be interesting to think about that and applying some of the, some of the dynamics of that movie to this situation. Do you know what I mean? Like that's when I think you can start incorporating things like, oh, what if this character that they're putting all this pressure on all of a sudden pulls the Diewu and not necessarily cuts off her leg, but does whatever she can or he can to spite all of the people that are putting all this pressure on them. You just start to see the opportunities that you might not see if you sort of find the connections to whatever it is that you're drawing on. But I think it's like a GM vocabulary. Like, you watch all these movies, you read all these books, and you get like okay, this is now the time to bring Godzilla to the table. Do you know what I mean? This is now the time to unleash the zombie apocalypse. Do you know what I mean? Like it gives you resources, and so that's how I would largely use a movie like Heroes Shed No Tears.
Yeah, it's too tightly plotted to try and recreate it exactly at the table, but the circumstances that gave rise to the things that are good about its plot, those are something you can bring to a table very easily, as long as you understand them. Strong emotional attachment, that very manipulative, betrayal-based villain plotline, a lot of interconnected and interwoven conflicting passions. All of that is something that you can easily bring. You don't even have to do specifically a Wuxia game system to bring all those things into. I mean, because that's in a lot of ways that's Dune too.
Yeah.
It's Game of Thrones.
No,
thank you.
No, that stuff's good. I mean, with this, I mean, it would be very easy to flip it and be like, okay, Sima Chao Chun and Dong Lai, they're NPCs in the martial world, and that organization is spreading everywhere, and the player characters are part of another organization that is being encroached upon by this one that's trying to dominate the martial world. And that could be that would be a really easy way to game it, because that doesn't require that anything specific happens. It just, it just uses the premise of the movie as a sort of background for your martial world, and it kind of bakes in the conflict of the film. But the players could just go off and, loot tombs or something if they really wanted to.
It's nice to have just a couple of dungeons scattered in there on top of that, because your players will get bored and they'll want to stab some goblins. Let them do it. Okay.
But yeah, I think that would be another way to do it. But again, and also the box. The box is something you could totally rip and turn into.
How would you do the box? I'm curious. I want the box to be a thing in games. I don't know how I make.
I've never done the box itself. I've done devices like it. Like if you look at the Crocodile Sect book that I did for the Sex of the Martial World, there's a bunch of there's one of the guys in there is like a really good weapons engineer and weaponsmith, and he designs all these mechanical weapons that have special features that surprise your foes when you use them the right way. And so that's in the spirit of the box, but it's not the exact box. For the box, I think, number one, it's the kind of weapon where you can give it a little bit more power because it has this basic requirement that you have to be super agile and dexterous, and you have to be intelligent to even use the thing. So
be
like
at least this good to use the box.
Yeah, so like I might even say like, okay, the box so in Ogre Gate it requires a speed and a reasoning roll in order to even use it. You know what I mean? Like every time you use this weapon, you have to make a successful roll for each of those. And then if you do, you get the weapon that you need, which will maybe give you a small bonus against the foe that you're fighting. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe it's an extra wound, or maybe it's a bonus to an attack, or maybe it protects your defense. I think you'd have to kind of have floating bonuses that depend on the circumstances. Do you know what I mean? Because that's a box that produces a specific new weapon to deal with a very specific threat. And so depending on what that is, you would want to have wiggle room to apply the bonuses differently.
Yeah, I could put it beyond bonuses, though. Like, I would almost want to run it like I'd run a puzzle in a game, like, as far as, like, the opponent. Because, like, it has that same element where, like, the last thing they do with the box is they make this kind of, like, sword-grabbing, like, man-hook weapon thing. And it's specifically designed as a sort of, like, puzzle trap, where it has all these like elements that are puzzle elements to it. And that's because they don't have a long time to analyze it. It's instrumental in beating the main bad guy. It actually they use the lure of its clever trap nature to make certain it gets in his hands. So its weakness that they also built into it can be exploited to kill him, which they do. So
go ahead.
Well, the puzzle element of that is beyond just bonuses and rolls. That's an actual puzzle element. That's a move and counter move that exists, like, just in the description of the weapon, but that's beyond just the numerical aspect of it.
But that's why I was leaning on floating bonuses and doing it by circumstance, because I was kind of saying that, like, if, like, and it depends on how much your players engage it, but basically whatever they try to pull out of there, if they're very specific like that, then I think you should let them, you kind of, it's a situation where it's like a very much a rulings over rules type of weapon, where you really need to be able to say, okay, this is what you're trying to do. Here's the effect I think that is going to have if it's successful. Do you know what I mean?
Thinking about the last weapon, because that is the ultimate weapon that eventually vanquishes the villain. It's the only way they actually outsmart him. You would have to make it so that it can capture weapons, and it can attack you if you try to get the weapon. But also, there's a secret release catch that allows you to get a surprise attack on them if they use it. And they're invested in it in this one particular way. Like, so that last part, the first two parts I think you can just do mechanically. That very last part, though, is descriptive. Like, you might make it so there's a roll they can use to, like a detect traps kind of roll to note that it does that. But, like, that very last bit, that very last actually clever twist is something that isn't just purely mechanical. You see what I mean?
Well, you would let him get a detect roll to see the thing, and then if he doesn't succeed, in my game I would give them a surprise attack, which would convert and the damage would go from being a closed roll to an open roll, which is a massive increase, and that would explain why it would be so easy to kill him.
I actually know what you're talking about now, because I've been reading Ogre Gate. That's cool. That's a nice change of pace.
Yeah, but that's how I would handle it. Again, but I think the key is you don't know what the players are going to. Number one, your players have to be super intelligent to come up with that particular one, and you have to be very generous in meeting them halfway to make it actually work, I suppose. But because that was a very perfect situation. Let's assume that's all the case. You're never going to know that in advance, so you're not going to have like an hour to come up with all the details of the weapon. So at every individual step, you're going to have to say, okay, when he uses it to poke the guy's hand, it does X amount of damage, and they have to make a roll, or they just flinch and release it or something, and those kinds of things. You have to just kind of each step apply. This is what I think it would do, and I think that's fine. I mean, for some people, they might be upset that you're throwing this stuff into the ether that might never actually return again if the identical circumstances were met. But I feel like the purpose of it is for the GM to kind of act as a physics engine in that moment. And
Yeah,
so
I think you kind of have to, or at least to make a ruling that's consistent with what you would expect.
yeah, yeah,
Going back to the conversation on the fourth ed, that was a thing that was brought up in that conversation. They highlighted this thing where in a lot of online argumentation, the assumption seems to be that your GM is a real jerk and does everything they can to kill you. And like the guy who was arguing against fourth was like, well, that was never an assumption back when I played. We should have an assumption that your GM is basically reasonable whenever we have these arguments. And I was like, oh, that's actually a good point to make.
Well, I think and I think just to get back on that, I suppose, that was something that I definitely noticed when fourth edition came out. The people who liked it were often the people that had unsatisfying experiences with third edition and some of its excesses, and also a lot of it depended on how your group handled certain things, and if GM ran a game a certain way, maybe certain frustrations emerged that didn't emerge in another campaign. I mean, I think we all kind of know the lessons of that whole period, which is every campaign and every group kind of plays the thing differently. And I think when they released fourth edition, I think what happened was, I remember them putting that out and saying, this is absolutely the best edition of the game ever. Do you know what I mean? And when they said that, I remember believing that was going to be the case, because I was a little bit more myopic at the time, maybe. And then when it came out, I remember looking at me like, this isn't what I wanted. Because I was also dissatisfied with third edition. Like, there were things about it I didn't like, but I wanted those things fixed. I didn't want a completely new game. So I guess my take home from that whole period is, it's very difficult to sort of navigate what you're talking about, because every group is so different in terms of why they play the game and what problems they have at their table, and in terms of what mechanics are going to be a problem for them. Do you know what I mean? For some people, third edition had all kinds of issues that just produced nothing but frustration and debate at the table. And for other people, third edition was the best thing since sliced bread. And for a few others, it was something that you could, when you threaded the needle the right way, it worked perfectly fine. You just had to be mindful of some of the potential issues that could come up in the game. And so I think part of it is a question of how perfect do you want a game to function without human intervention? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And not everybody's on the same table when it comes to that. Some people want a functional system that has some rough spots that the GM can kind of,
yeah. And then some people would be fine with an optional GM where the mechanics are the end-all, be-all of how the game functions.
Yeah.
So the need for rulings is greatly diminished. And I don't want to say that either approach is really invalid, because, I play board games. Those don't have a GM. Those are fun. But I would say that I come to role-playing games because they have GMs. And because they have a GM, they invite that humanizing element of rulings, which you cannot, and you can't do the same things in a board game you can do in a role-playing game, because you do have a human being there you can talk to and reason with.
Yeah. And
the two broad assertions, because that's an acknowledged fact of role-playing games, that differentiates them from board games. But the assumption for a long time has been, or at least online in argumentation, in places like the Giant in the Playground forums, where there's a lot of mechanical talk and a lot of mechanical metagame talk, the assumption becomes that your GM, if they do something beyond the scope of the rules when you're role-playing, that's something that can't be entered into these discussions. And the reason for that is because it's an X factor because it varies so much between tables, like you said, there's no real way to predict how a GM is going to react to you proposing something. Like, I push over this big rock can be ruled like, okay, you push it over and it falls, or it could be make a strength check, or it could be make 3 strength checks and then make a save to see if you fall. It just depends on how your GM wants to interpret it and how that manifests at that table.
And some players will get really hung up on they'll really be maybe super critical of the GM, and some people won't. And I feel like a lot of it boils down to how much do you trust another person's ability to make these kind of calls. And my whole approach to play is, if Rob is running the game, I trust Rob's judgment to do that. I don't worry, oh, that's not how I would have done it, or he's forgetting about this important law of physics that should be applied. I don't worry about that. I just say, okay, we're in Bob's world, and this is how Bob runs reality for us. And if I'm playing in Adam's game, it's going to be different than Rob's game, but I know that this is how Adam does things. And this is, and so either way, at the end of the day, what you end up with is a fairly consistent world, because the GM is always going to be using their brain that they have. So, I mean, Rob is always going to be thinking in Rob terms, and Adam's always going to be thinking in Adam terms, and Brendan's always going to be thinking in Brendan terms. So even if it's not, what everybody else would do, it's always going to be what Brendan would do, or always going to be what Rob would do. So
yeah, I think because we're a little older, and I think our groups are pretty stable about who we game with. There's not this sort of casual, I don't know the people I'm gaming with element that we don't have to deal with that, you and I. But I think that does exist. I think there is a much larger chunk of people gaming now that don't do anything aside from game with the people they're gaming. They're not just friends on top of that. Because back whenever we started gaming, it was these are your friends, and then you play a game.
Yeah.
Nowadays, it can get turned on its head where you meet someone because you go to their game that they've advertised, and so your first interaction with them.
But here's the thing: that's happened to me. Like my friend Rob, that's how I met him. I met him through gaming. He was looking for a Savage Worlds group, and I think I responded to something he posted, but we became friends. Do you know what I mean? I think. That's how I always approach this. I'm not just there to game with you. Do you know what I mean? I'm not just there to play because you're a body that's willing to move a piece on the table. I'm there to play because, number one, I want to play a game, but also I like to play games with people that I like and people that I can be friends with. So I feel like maybe there's a stylistic difference that some people have there, and I don't know if it's generational or not. But for me, it's I generally need to play with people that I consider myself friends with or capable of being friends with. And the moment I play at a table I don't like, I just don't come back to it. That's so
you do the vote with your feet, I think is what they call that.
Well, I mean, I'm not rude about it, but I've been to games at stores and stuff where I was like, this group is doing things in a way that I just wouldn't do them, and I'm not gonna continue coming here. Do you know what I mean? I think it's the way I look at it is your time is precious. So don't waste your time, but also don't I don't know, sometimes when I see these debates online and people really sort of get upset about a GM ruling or whatever, I feel like you got to be a little flexible. You know what I mean? You got to be an ounce of flexibility is important in a hobby like this. Assume good faith on people's part, unless they're really being jerks about something. I've had GMs that have, they were sitting there sharpening their pencil and eager to just make everybody miserable. But those are rare people. I haven't met many people like that.
I've only encountered a few, but that's the thing. I will game with them all of once or twice, because as soon as they get really vicious, I'm not having fun, and I find some other way. I can play Mario Kart and have fun, dude. I don't got to be in your D&D game.
Yeah.
I'll find something else to do. I got 2 giant shelves full of books over here. I will find a way to be entertained, dude. I'm not gonna sit and do something that makes me miserable.
But but speaking of which, we've been on for an hour and a half now, so I think we should probably end the episode here. What any parting thoughts on gaming or on Heroes Shed No Tears before we head out?
The biggest parting thought I think that I've had from the kind of blossomed out of this whole conversation that we had about gaming is that make fertile soil. Make fertile soil and use good seeds and good gardening techniques to grow a good garden. Whether you're making a really good movie or trying to run a really good game, understand what the elements that encourage those good things happening are, and then let the good things happen naturally and just guide them only when appropriate. So that's my parting thought for this whole thing. Okay, my parting thought is going to be a plug, which I think is fair because we've been going for an hour and a half, so how many people will actually hear the plug? But I have a free book called The Tournament of Dalu, and I would recommend it to people based on this conversation because it's a setting where it's
done in a city, but it's a similar type thing where there's all these different power groups, and the premise is the players sort of wander into the city and rise through the ranks of the city in the the local martial world, presumably being criminals. So I think that you could have a similar type of campaign using some of the material from that book, and it's free. You don't have to pay a dime for it. Or actually, is it free? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's free. I think it's a pay what you want. But
all my stuff is pay what you want too.
In fact, you know what? Hold on. Let me check so I don't lie on air about one of my own products that I should know the price of.
I've only got one, so I can't hold you that. You've got quite a few out there.
Yeah, but this one's only a couple of years old. I should really know the answer to this one.
I don't even remember what I wrote in the current draft of Lone Wolf Fist that's out there for sale. And that's been less than a year and my only product. So don't feel bad.
So it's pay what you want. The suggested price is $4.99, so I'm happy to take that if anybody wants to pay that. But it's pay what you want.
Almost every time I get actual money coming in to the Lone Wolf Fist, a lot of people just kind of grab it to check it out. Every time I get money coming in, it's usually like $5, $10, $15. Like, people actually put down a good chunk of change on it. And speaking as a guy that takes that money and turns it into more books and art and things like that, it really helps, folks.
No, it does. It does. I mean, that's largely what it pays for, especially with a book like this. Also, a lot of it goes to my co-author in the book. I pay him royalties for that one. So, but yeah. So again, it's Heroes Shed No Tears. It's a really good movie. It's on Amazon. You can also read the story at Wuxia World, and it's translated by Deathblade there. And I really enjoyed that version of it. I'd never read it in Chinese, obviously, so I don't have a point of comparison. But I enjoyed reading the translation, and I would highly recommend it. What I would recommend is watching the movie first, then maybe checking out the story, because you'll have sort of like a visual to hang all of your names on and everything. So I think that's a good way to go about it. And yeah, so we'll be back on. I think our next movie is supposed to be, depends on if we can all get a copy, a Chinese ghost story, which I'm really looking forward to covering again.
I'm trying to wine and dine David Ramirez into coming and talking with us. It's been a little difficult. He's had some, because he's a dual citizen of China and Mexico. Like, there's a lot of stuff he has to deal with. So he's currently dealing with some of it. But yeah, I'm trying to wine and dine.
Is he residing in China or is he residing in Mexico?
I think he resides in China, and then he will consistently visit Mexico. So he's so much bureaucracy the guy's going to deal with.
And I've heard it's getting harder to reside in China as a foreigner too.
He has a lot to say about it. So,
I mean, things are changing there, from what I've gathered. Things are changing quite a bit. So on that note, I suppose we will head out, and I think we still have another episode of Doctor Who to cover, probably on Wednesday or Thursday, hopefully, and then on Friday, I think we're doing Flying Swords of Dragon Gate Inn. I know that we were supposed to do it like 2 weeks ago and then the week after. I got confused with the schedule and there was some cancellations. So last week we did another movie, and this week I think we're doing Flying Swords of Dragon Gate. But don't hold me. And all right, until then, we will talk to you later.